Thank you everybody so much for the time this evening. I know we'll have long days here. We're super excited to kick off the third episode of VisiSight's Partner University program, also known as PUP. Extremely excited to welcome three special guests here this evening. For one, we have Greg Schimpff and Yang Shi, both co-founders of VetSnap. So if those of you who aren't familiar with VetSnap, it's a controlled logbook that has recently taken the stage as an innovative solution to simply manage how your controlled substance inventory works. VetSnap puts you back into control and saves you time, making compliance a snap, essentially. We're also welcoming Angela Morisette, the VP of Business Operations at Scratchpay. For those of you who haven't heard of Scratchpay before, they've now begun to provide payment plans that make it easy for your pet parents to say yes to more treatment. More recently, Scratchpay created a payment processing suite that allows a practice to send digital payment requests through multiple channels and in-person payment requests via terminals. So here at VisiSights, we talk a lot about different technologies that reduce friction at the hospital. Our marketing managers or consultants have been educating this industry on this specific topic for years. You know, VetSnap and Scratchpay share a lot of similar goals that VisiSights does. And we felt that there was a great opportunity to show our clients even more ways that technology can reduce stress at the day-to-day at the clinic, which is our topic for today's discussion. So a couple of just guidelines here. We'd love to encourage any engagement. So questions, comments, even any type of additional information that you might request. Down below, you can utilize the question and answers functionality that Zoom offers. So feel free to go ahead, dump those in, placeholders so we don't forget, and we'll be taking periodic stops throughout our time here to address those. But without further ado, Angela, you want to take it away?
Yeah, and I'll throw it to, hey everyone, I'll throw it to Yang actually and Greg. They'll be kicking us off today, and we're all super excited to be here with you guys. So thanks for joining.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Angela. So, and it's interesting because Angela, Greg, and I, we all know each other prior to our current roles. We were all at National Veterinary Associates. So it's a little bit of a homecoming, no pun intended, for all of us tonight. So really good to be hanging out with a swell crew. So quick intro of myself, and then I'll hand it over to Greg. One of the co-founders of VetSnap. Prior to VetSnap, I held a variety of roles at National Veterinary Associates, most recently as head of technology for the company, helping scale up the support for all of our resorts, specialty hospitals, and general practice hospitals. Before that, did a hodgepodge of roles in totally unrelated matters like aerospace, product management, and management consulting. I really got into this industry because my wife and I adopted, in the picture you see there, Penny. So we adopted Penny, and then MVA came a knocking, and I had no idea what this industry was about 6 years ago. But we loved Penny so much that we just decided it was worth it to take a risk. So we quit, uprooted ourselves from the Bay Area, and ended up in pet care. So with that, hand it over to Greg.
Thanks, Yang. Pleasure to be with everybody tonight. And always great to see an NVA alum and friend, Angela. Really excited to be co-hosting with her today on this webinar. Yeah, so first and foremost, Yang and I met at NVA. We're really good friends. It's just funny how life works out. You meet people that you just you click with, and we had a opportunity to work together while he was at NVA. I joined the NVA in 2005, so I spent about 15 years with the organization. It was a really small company when I joined, and I did a number of things there, mainly accounting and finance focused. But then towards the latter part of my career, at NVA, I led procurement and vendor relations, so negotiated with all the big pharma companies and lab companies, distribution, and so on. And spent obviously a lot of time working with hospitals and working with hospital leaders. NVA, as companies do, grow every year. Yang and I, during last year, before pre-pandemic, made a decision to do something a little bit different, to go out on our own and do something a little bit more impactful for the folks directly at the hospital, and co-founded VetSnap. So really excited to share what we're doing with VetSnap. And like kind of what keeps us cranking? Like why did we decide to do this? Well, the slide here that we're showing you, really, what it does is it highlights one of the practices that we're working with today, Mountain View Veterinary Hospital. Mountain View is a lot like, is like a lot of hospitals out there that have just experienced, lots of growth, pre-pandemic, and then during the pandemic, and now even post-pandemic. It's like they're in ludicrous mode in terms of growth. If you get that Spaceballs reference, great. So working with Dr. Pelletier and the staff over at Mountain View, we were able to offer them a digital solution for their controlled logbook, to really help them minimize the amount of physical paperwork that needed to be done, and automating and guiding the physical inventory process. It was a very manual process, as it exists today in many practices, thousands of practices across the nation, and we were able to help them out, and onboard them with VetSnap, our digital controlled logbook. When Yang and I set out to co-found the company, we really wanted to make sure that we were developing something that was going to save hospitals time and save staff time, so they can really get back to doing the things that are important, which is taking care of clients, and most importantly the pets that they serve.
Yeah. So speaking of digital innovation and time savings, this is a theme that I back in my old role at MVA, I'd always talk about with new hospitals that joined us, when they talked about, hey, like what does IT provide for the hospital? What does technology provide for the hospital? And you often hear of the phrase digital disruption. And here at VetSnap, as I'm sure at Scratchpay as well, it's not disruption, right? You don't want to disrupt a hospital and put things to a grinding halt. You actually want to nudge, kind of dip your toe in the water and kind of like smoothly glide in, right? Like with technology, not really disrupt. And one way to help folks think about when and what's the right time to evaluate like what technology to adopt. Think about it really as people first, your own people first, right? Like, are you solving something that's important for your folks, your staff? Is it really painful, or is it just kind of like a shiny gimmick? And that's where Greg and I, we focused on control logs, because one, we interviewed all the hospitals and, across, the different time and motion analysis that we did for how they manage inventory and how they manage controlled drugs. We just saw the pain and the amount of double work, potential opportunity for errors with controlled drugs. And we knew that was a big pain point. And then process, got to make sure that the technology, right, that you're going to adopt actually fits your process in the hospital. It probably shouldn't shut down your hospital for multiple days at a time in order to deploy, unless it's going to generate a ton of return. And is the timing right? Do you have the time? Do you have the willingness of the folks, which goes back to the people? Is it addressing their pain point? And for us at VetSnap, how we thought about it is like we made the process as familiar as possible as a current day controlled log management process. Except when it comes to technology, the last point, we automated a bunch of stuff. So we made it easier for folks to fill out logs, easier for folks to reconcile, and overall just reduce the opportunities for errors, and sped up that whole process. So something else that we'll share. And Greg and I, we're not controlled log experts, and sure there are many more experts out there with more experience than us. But in the last year and a half that we've dove into this area, just sharing with you all some of the best practices that we've seen, we've learned, we've heard from our hospitals that we've served. And I'm sure it's familiar with everybody here. And just keep in mind, this takes time to do. And digitization, integration with the PIMS helps address a lot of these activities. But just, going down the list, want to keep track of containers, not just when you open them, not just when you purchase them, when you open them, where are they being used by which patients, for what purpose, which goes to be clear and descriptive when it comes to the purpose of the usage. There's a lot of fields that we see people fill out in a control log, where VetSnap goes and pulls from the practice management system and helps fill that all in to save time, prevent errors. Documenting waste, right? Like just be sure to document it. Small spills associated with serving a patient, or large spills like you drop the bottle, hopefully not, because that's expensive. Validating controlled log to PIMS that we see consistently across the board. Hospitals will make sure that their control logs, the amounts used, match what's in the medical records, or the invoice or the inventory somewhere in the practice management system. Doing physical counts on a regular basis, whether it's weekly or monthly. We also make that process very easy by creating any kind of discrepancy logs automatically for the user. And then approved signature workbooks, so you know who's approved to sign off on what. And then finally, documents readily and accessible at the hospital, should you ever get into an audit situation by DEA or the state. For us, it's beneficial because we keep everything in the cloud. It's backed up, available 24/7. Can't rip it, can't spill on it, can't lose it, and multiple people can access it.
So as Yang mentioned, we had the opportunity to speak with a lot of hospitals and really dig in and understand their process. And some of it was being able to do time and motion studies actually at the hospital, at some of the hospitals, to see the current day process. And this slide just really captures and summarizes I think what we've heard and seen what in terms of what hospital teams are experiencing throughout the nation. A lot of logging going on. Writing it down in a paper entry takes time. There's a lot of there are a lot of things that they need to write down that's required within a logbook, whether that's client name, client address, client ID, as well as the drug and the dose and all of those different types of things. There's just a lot of writing that goes on, and we realize that hospitals, that's not the only thing that hospital staff and doctors have to do every day. The logging and reconciliation piece takes a lot of time. Realize that it's not done. Sometimes, occasionally, we hear it's done daily, but more likely it's done either weekly, bi-weekly, in some rare cases monthly. And so, depending on the volume that the hospital does, it's just a compounding issue. The more you wait, the more reconciliation you end up having to do. And then the corrections that need to be made, in terms of, matching the logs to the practice management software, reconciling the actual inventory counts, just takes quite a bit of time. And, hospitals are obviously, trying to stay on top of it, but it can just be really difficult with all the competing priorities that are going on today.
So, I'm going to jump in with a question for you, Greg, or Yang. Is there a way that you've seen with kind of all the connectivity you've had with hospitals? Like, I'm not a super detail-oriented person sometimes. Like, is there ways that hospitals are doing this, not to make it necessarily fun, but maybe to just like increase compliance with the process, or having some like best practices around checks, stuff like that?
Yeah. So Greg, maybe I'll take a shot at
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
So good question. It's kind of biased to say this, but currently with the manual process, it's not very fun. Like, I guess you could leave a sticker book in there, and every time you make no mistakes, give yourself a sticker or something. But with our process, because we automate a lot of the entry and we make the error correction process more guided, it ends up being better when they do those physical counts on like a quarterly basis. They're not just wildly off because it's almost like because we make it easier for them to use it, people actually want to use it. If it's hard to use, no one's going to use it and compliance is going to drop. I don't know. It sounds kind of, intuitive, but that's just what it is. I don't know if it's fun. We haven't really thought about, Angela, we haven't thought about gamifying. Like, we run reports and we'll have reports for how often people need to catch like missing logs, missing invoices, how far they're off on counts and things like that. I'm sure gave us something to think about, like some kind of like fun activities to help improve them and give them guidance. But good question. I mean, it goes back to nudging, right? Like, you don't want to disrupt them and be like, no, you're doing it all wrong. It's like, no one's gonna want to change if you like just say that what they're doing today is wrong, but make it like a slow nudge to get better so they can ace the audit, not just pass it.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'd say, Angela, is, because it takes them so much time to do it, to do the error correction. We've heard, one case, one hospital we were just talking to that's out of Florida. They used to spend like between 40 minutes and an hour reconciling, and now it takes them about 5 minutes to do it. And so that right there, I feel like they really feel the value of getting that time back. And then that manager that's also a technician at the practice, which is fairly common, doing technician duties, can actually go back out on the floor and interact with clients and interact with patients, and not have to spend that hour trying to figure out where did the log entries go wrong, where was the issue in the PIMS, because the software that we have essentially just tells them where it is. So
yeah. Time back is always fun, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I have to give you a hard time. I feel like
absolutely.
Anyway, go on.
Cool. Well, that's a great segue
question. Yeah.
What happens when they roll it out?
Exactly. So the typical process, how staff manages controlled substances, right? Again, can't stress enough the log, the manual logging that goes on, staff having to try to audit the controlled logs to match it to the practice management software. They're printing out paper, they're trying to find the errors. And a lot of times, right, like the logs will match the practice management software, but they're still having to go through that exercise of physically checking. Wonderful thing about VetSnap is, we simplify the logging process by helping to, autofill, necessary information. And then with the error, the error reconciliation process, we're able to find, we're able to find discrepancies between logs and the invoices, and essentially just push through the things that already match with with our algorithm. So just saving them a lot of time there, so they're not having to do duplicative work or redundant work, checking things that are already correct, because essentially we're able to do that for them. And then discrepancies with the inventory counts takes a lot of time today, looking through different logbooks, unopened container logbooks, open container logbooks, and trying to just kind of make sense of what's what with their running balance. And, great thing about VetSnap is we've got all the information, we're capturing all of it, and we're able to report out on everything that's done within the system, which really, I think, as Yang was talking about, in the beginning, was that we're just able to help kind of show them, that the counts are, in real time and are fairly accurate. When they get time to then do another cycle count, whether that's biweekly, monthly, or quarterly, it gets closer and it shrinks that variance. The last thing I would just mention is, because we're PIMS integrated, that's how really we're pulling all of the information into the system. Again, making it really easy for hospitals to, do all of the necessary things that you do when you're managing your controlled logs. Again, whether it's logging, reconciling, or managing your physical counts.
Cool. And yeah, Greg, you already covered a lot of these points, so I won't repeat that, but folks have it on the presentation. So just some highlights of how we help you save time, reduce stress. And, we'll just cap it off with another, that's why Greg, examples like these is why Greg and I, we wake up every day, and everybody else, the folks at VetSnap, we're all big pet lovers. We all have dogs and cats. So that's what it's all about. With that, transitioning over to Angela with another way digital innovation can help with reducing stress.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was super exciting to learn a little bit more too about just VetSnap overall. And I have to give you guys a hard time because I feel like you'll always ask really great questions to me. So then, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar again. I'm going to try to ask a couple questions, maybe just get some chat responses as well throughout. And if you have a question, please feel free just to go off mute, cut me off, and ask. But what I'll be covering today is how to reduce stress through different types of payments. So we're going to cover, you're probably familiar with Scratchpay's payment plans. So again, that's our all digital solution that a client can kind of apply for when they might be at your practice and realize that they don't have the funds today to pay for the services. We actually give them a way to then pay us back monthly, but we pay your practice up front. So with our plan product, we've been around since 2016 with that. And then I'm really excited to talk to you today about kind of payments in general. So taking a step back from the payment plans, Scratchpay's also now moved into payment processing. So we're going to cover kind of 3 actionable things you can do in your practice today in order to use your payments tools to reduce team stress. So we'll cover these first 2, the plan and payments. And then I've left my email if you have any questions at the end that we don't get to. It's just Angela@scratchpay.com. Please feel free to reach out with anything I might miss. Great. So we'll kind of kick off with, why even think about payments? This might seem like something that's pretty maybe foundational at your practice. You might be thinking, yeah, I've used the same payment processor for a while. It's working fine. I take the credit cards, it's all good. I just want to pull up a couple stats that are a little bit less known in the payments world to help you kind of reframe how you think about payments. So by employing some of these tactics we'll talk about, we're hoping to save your practice kind of time and funds. So on average, when you use a digitally driven payments workflow, you really can save about 30 seconds per transaction of phone time. And if we've learned one thing with COVID and phones, it's that COVID has made the phone lines busier, even busier than they already were in your practice. And so what we've kind of found through a couple of our studies here is just that even if you can knock off, 30 seconds of time and you're running, between 10 and 20 transactions a day, that ends up kind of like VetSnap, right? Where if you just kind of build it in habitually, you're going to end up saving your team a ton of time that can then be refocused on the parts of the business that probably your team likes a lot more than, no offense to VetSnap or Scratchpay, but probably likes a lot more than logging substances and taking payments. So that can be a big, just right off the top benefit and stress reducer when you don't have to get on the phone to collect a payment. And then a second fact I'll kind of cover here, just educational, that I actually kind of learned myself a couple of weeks ago, is that 60% of consumers and pet parents, by that logic, are more likely to use point of sale financing over the next 6 to 12 months, which that has exponentially grown over the last 3 years. So what we mean by point of sale financing is when a pet parent is at your practice, if you can offer them some sort of way to extend the payment timing with their payments, 60% of pet parents are saying, hey, yeah, that's an attractive option for me. So that's something we'll kind of cover with how, you can, if you're interested in kind of offering a more convenient option, how you can do that with scratch plans. And then lastly, AHA had a study in 2019 that kind of stated that they looked at a number of practices, and that for practices that had over 4 different payment types, whether that be the ability to take, bank accounts, checks, wellness plans, etc., as a payment type, they were actually 3 times more likely to get paid for certain kind of client demographics. So that's just something that's really important. I truly believe money doesn't necessarily make you happy, but it can reduce a lot of stress if you don't have to worry about where it's being collected from. So we'll kind of cover the different payment plan and payments options, so how you can diversify and kind of reap the benefits of having more options. I did want to ask a question for the group. If you're at the chat and don't mind sharing, would love to know what the most favorite non-traditional payment plan method that your practice has used is. We've seen a lot of different, I see Cassandra in there, Apple Pay. Yep, Apple Pay is a great one. Kind of, you don't have to have your wallet on you if you've already registered on your iPhone, your credit card. Would love for us to just kind of share so we can learn from one another too, cool things that might have worked at your practice. So feel free to drop them in as we kind of go on to the next slide here, and we'll make sure we kind of revisit that in a bit. Awesome. So we'll kind of cover now just like 3 tips to reduce stress via payments. So we've got 3 different options here we'll cover today. And the good news is, like, all of these options are free to get set up, and you can get them going in your practice like really as soon as tomorrow if you were so inclined. So we'll cover adding a payment plan option, and of course we'll talk about Scratchpay with that, but we will kind of cover other options in the market as well. We'll talk about how to add digital payment types, again, so you can kind of reap the benefits of knowing that you're more likely to get paid for certain client demographics. And then lastly, we'll talk about collecting AR on AR. That might not seem like something that is, I don't want to say it's not like a super sexy thing to think about with the AR collections. However, when the average practice is looking at around 10,000 to 15,000 of AR balances occurring over their 3 years of practice life, that can be a really quick way to work with team members that might be quarantining for COVID protocols. We actually have a module in Scratchpay we'll show you on this webinar that you can actually have someone that might not be able to be physically at your practice go through and kind of send those requests to clients. It's actually a really high ROI exercise if you just have someone that's able to go in and kind of take that on as an extra responsibility. So first we'll kind of cover, again, adding scratch plans. So these are just some of the benefits on the right that practices have cited when they've added scratch plans. Really, we like to highlight that 78% of folks that use scratch plans say that it is the easiest dashboard and option for their teams to use as far as digital payments tools. We firmly believe that adding a new payment type of any sort should not add any extra stress to the practice. So it's really easy to get signed up. Really what you do when you sign up to offer Scratchpay is just let us know that you want your practice listed as an option for when pet parents are looking at our website to apply. So if you are kind of interested in just opting in to get that set up, it takes about 2 minutes to fill out a quick form I can link you to. And from there, you're off to the races being able to offer Scratchpay as a payment plan type. Some of the benefits as well of having plans like us, so you don't have to pick us. But just having a buy now, pay later option, again, allows you to capitalize on those like 60% of kind of more millennial pet parents that are thinking about using, extended payment plans to finance their care. And it can really allow your doctor and your doctors and your team to kind of recommend that like plan A of care. So not necessarily having your team feel like you have to like say, oh, Angela's coming in. I know she's not going to opt for the best level of care because of price. So I'm going to knock off, X, Y, and Z service or product. What Scratchpay can really kind of alleviate for your team is like that burden of not being able to offer like optimal medical care. Because if you can't offer it and the conversation with the client becomes a little easier of, hey, here's what we'd recommend is the best level of care for Luna. You can spread that out over 12 months. That conversation is a little bit easier if you have a client that's maybe dealing with sticker shock and kind of projecting that back onto your staff members of, like, oh man, maybe they really just weren't expecting a certain price. Unfortunately, we can't solve that necessarily, but what we can do is kind of be equipped with options. So if a client has that reaction, we just have a quick kind of comeback of, totally get it. We have this option. It can help you out. So that's one way that
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say to the ease of use note as well. I know we have clients, some of whom are here today, who will, we get the message when they initially sign up for Scratchpay, like, hey, can we add it to our payment options page? And it's like the new one for them, right? That the team's unsure about still. So it's added to like the bottom of the page. And then sure enough, after like a month or two and they're used to it, we get another message from them that's like, hey, can you move it to the top? We really want to encourage more clients to use this one because it's so much easier. So just vouching, I have heard that same thing, and to the point where they really are kind of promoting it more just because it makes their life so much easier to use.
Oh, awesome. That's great to hear, Cassandra. That's definitely what we try to go for. And like our philosophy overall is just like, don't pay unless you use us. So it's really like low risk. If you just want to sign up and see if anyone ever applies for it, we totally encourage that just to kind of have an extra option in the back pocket. A lot of folks already have at their practice, maybe like an alternative healthcare credit card option. Name in the room, usually it comes up as like a Care Credit or a Wells Fargo. And like having a buy now, pay later non-credit card option can be really useful for the conversations as well.
Absolutely. I would like to add, Angela, if that's okay. I see this extremely applicable as I care for two high-need pets myself. I have a mini dachshund with IVDD and a diabetic cat. My dachshund, for instance, I see this being extremely applicable when I'm having the conversations with my DVM about dental health, right? I think we all know what a dental quote looks like, where it can be $1,000 to $2,500. And as a client in a buying making decision, it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to say that yes, when I don't necessarily know what to expect. When you have this option at your disposal, granted, the doctor has not been able to see any extractions that might need to come out, but I understand that I'm not going to have to foot the bill all at once that day. So I love it.
Totally. And like, this is something too, where when you start to examine like the root cause of stress and burnout for veterinary teams, unfortunately, a big thing that we've seen come up in conversations is like on a more serious note is really like the anxiety and stress that comes with, frankly, like clients that just don't understand like what is an absolutely reasonable cost of care. But they might just not have the expectation because they don't have the same level of veterinary knowledge as us folks on this webinar do. So we really, that's kind of our mission and purpose is to just make like those difficult decisions easier as well. So thanks for sharing, Danny. And so that's Scratch Plans. And one thing, actually, I'll flip back. If you are interested after, if you just want to shoot me like a quick note, like, hey, Angela, I'm interested, feel free to just ping me a quick email and we'll get you set up as soon as your team is ready. And then moving on, so outside of adding kind of the extended buy now, pay later options to your practice, one thing that we've seen also as kind of a revolution within COVID is people's willingness to pay digitally. through a number of different means. So actually 54% of folks from that same study I cited earlier say that they'd like to manage their healthcare payments digitally. And so that's something that I would say before COVID, there weren't a ton of options really on the market. And then as curbside became really a necessary thing for a lot of the nation, that's where we kind of stepped in. We were hearing feedback from our practices that use Scratchpay, and they were saying, hey, we'd love if you could do some more digital options, not just for the extended plans, but to help us process payments. So we've kind of come up with this suite. You can just see some of the options here on the screen, wherein we have like an all digital portal where you can process. We have the ability to do in-person payments as well with this terminal here. It's a completely wireless terminal that can be like taken out to a car, for instance. But we do have some really cool things we'll show in a bit on text to pay and email to pay that can really help if you'd want to send a client their bill when they're, for say, still in the car. And sort of with that, just kind of adding, like changing payment processors overall can be kind of like a scary and daunting thought. I think a lot of what we've talked about in this webinar is, you get some benefits from maybe switching processes, but when you're in the moment and you're thinking about, okay, this is going to be an ask I maybe have for my team, like how do I make that ask? I think really highlighting some of the time savings can help with like that change management of, hey, we're going to introduce a new way of doing something. It might take, a couple more hours up front to learn it, but then your week to week is going to be so much easier. Is kind of how we found is best to message that. One other thing that doesn't hurt when you're talking about making a system switch is like a cost savings. So I won't spend a ton of time here, but one thing that we've seen a lot of practices do over the pandemic is just sort of start to shop around a little bit for, evaluating systems to see, hey, am I getting the best pricing I can be? I'm sure Greg could do a whole other webinar about how to maybe drive a hard bargain with some vendors. But that's something that too, like we're happy to help with, as well as if you're kind of starting to look at payment processing as a line item in your business, maybe your cost for payment processing actually went up over COVID because you were doing more like card not present transactions, which have a higher back end cost. We're happy at Scratch just to do a completely like free evaluation of your payment processing. So that way we can just, help at least give you the peace of mind, like, hey, I'm getting a really good price on this. Or we'll also let you know, hey, we could potentially like beat your price if you wanted to switch processors. So that's something. I just have up some of the, common digital payment processors on the screen, and kind of what we charge. We go as low as 1.95 with a 20-cent payment, which is, a little bit cheaper than some of the other digital options. So that's really just an open kind of invite. One way you can reduce your stress is if you're getting a great deal, and we're happy to help do that eval for you guys.
Angela, we had a question from one of our attendees here that I'd like to read to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, great.
We were poised with, so my team dreads anytime I come to them with something new. How long does it usually take to train teams on the text or email payment tool? And how is it easier than calling to take payment?
Yeah, that is an awesome question. So I would say that the main thing that is easier and where we see it's great to be able to kind of advise your team on this is that phone lines, most people, I would say what we've seen when we've kind of talked to practices is that actually prefer not to be on the phone and to just be able to quickly send out a payment request. So I'll actually just quickly flip into a sample of like how quick it is to send a text payment with Scratchpay. So this is our all digital payments dashboard I'm pulling up here. Really, we only need 5 pieces of information. So if you're kind of contrasting the flow with like picking up the phone maybe explaining to the client, exactly what the service is going to be, putting that amount due, actually taking their credit card number over the phone and entering that in. That can actually add up if the client is potentially slow at getting you that information. That can add up to be, as I'm sure you know, like a 1 to 5 minute conversation per client. So with Scratchpay, what we do is just give you a portal to be able to request the amount due. You can add your client name, their phone, as well as if you're interested in tying it back to any sort of practice management system, we give you that option too. And once you hit send this payment request, which I'm in a demo account, so I'm not sure if it's actually going to send or not to me, but this will actually send to your client. And I'm going to open this up on my phone really quickly here. I'm actually going to see if I can do something unique and just show you on my phone here what this looks like, or I'll just quickly send this to me. But it ends up saving a significant amount of time because the client can actually just then fill out that invoice right in their car, right while they're waiting. So they can do that like while the appointment is finishing, and really can end up, what we've seen is it saves an average of about 30 seconds to a minute per transaction. And then the other thing that the team doesn't have to worry about then is like accidentally fat fingering a credit card number if the practice is getting that information over the phone. So it's really easy when you're dealing with a string of like 16 numbers to actually get one wrong or get the zip code wrong. And then that can actually result in like extra work. So by kind of putting the process in your client's hands, it saves time, and then it also kind of increases accuracy as well.
Adding on that conveniency factor, it's almost as if nowadays I think everybody at some point, Angela, has their credit card information stored on their phone, being Apple Pay, Google Pay, or just your debit or credit card where I can tap to pay essentially. It's the same.
Yes.
When I click the link and my credit card information is already filled out, like you're saying, reducing the human error risk. A question I wanted to ask as well here, because I think it's pertinent, as our attendee had also asked, how is it easier than taking payment? As I'm not as much of a payment expert as you are, Angela, but can you, from my understanding, there's a difference between a percentage rate when a card is physically being swiped on a terminal, and there's a percentage increase when the card is physically not present. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So that's a great question as well. So what we've done to like reduce just the confusion around that, because you could study processing rates for years and then still get like bamboozled by traditional processors. We actually just do offer a flat rate, regardless if it's card not present or card present. So like using the card with the terminal. And the reason we do that is because one, we've just negotiated a really good rate with our backend processor, so we can still offer it really cheaply. And then also, we really don't want to make any practice like have to choose a payment type that doesn't work as best for their workflow. Like we don't want a practice to be penalized from a cost perspective if like taking a payment over, we actually do have the ability to take a payment over the phone as well. Like if that was a desired option as well, we do have that as like a virtual terminal you can see on the screen. But we just believe that we want to do one flat rate so that way practices get to pick what's best for their workflow. So that's a great question. And just to like round off as well on I'm just going to pause my share for a second and pull up a sample of the invoice. I think what we see is it takes about an hour for the staff to do a couple of kind of reps of like the newer process. And a really good way to help with the change management too is to give a really, I don't want to say like a really easy way, but like a quick way to show value of the system that can be demonstrated in like 15 minutes or less. And we'll actually walk through how to do that with the Scratch system to kind of gain that buy-in from the team with kind of the AR collections process as well. That can be really empowering, we found, for different teams that might be hesitant to check out a new payment option, because kind of when you win back AR through digital payments, it's sort of free money, right? Like if no one was going to maybe follow up on it, or if it was going to be followed up with a paper statement, we found that that is really great as well for teams to get to kind of check it out without having to do it maybe right in the live, like day to day. So I'll show that in just a second, but I did want to show just an example of this is what your client would actually see either on their phone, or we have this as email to pay as well. And then they just can go in, they can actually pay with their bank account, which is like, might not seem like super intuitive, but if you think about it, more people actually have their bank account login memorized than have a credit card memorized, just with the kind of rise of digital payments management. So we give that option. And then like was mentioned, if I had Google Pay enabled on my browser, you would see Google Pay as an option, which would pull in a saved credit card. Same thing with Apple Pay, which is just really convenient for your clients. They just have to kind of double click on the Apple Pay. And then once they hit pay with card, pay with bank, or pay with Google Pay, that immediately writes back to your payment history on your dashboard. I'll show an example of a practice that just got started today. So this shows you hopefully how intuitive this is, but they just transferred all their payments starting today. And we just recorded the status of the payment in the dashboard, and it's super easy to issue refunds and similar. And then lastly, I'm just going to pull up this presentation one more time. If you're looking for an easy way, I think that was just a great question, whoever asked it, to ease your team in, get them comfortable with a new system. We found that AR collections can be a really easy way to do that. We actually offer in our dashboard that we were just looking at a free AR tool. And what that does is if you send out any payment request from Scratchpay, it'll actually mark it in the special report as still needing to be paid. So that way you can also import a sheet of your existing AR balances from your practice management system as well. And what this does is it actually automatically creates an invoice for those clients, a digital invoice. And then it allows your staff to kind of go through. You can actually customize the message that's being sent out to that client. And you can just kind of go through, hit send invoice, edit those messages as needed if you'd like. And then what we've seen on that is really like a 25% success rate on some of those collections. Again, that's going to depend on kind of your clients that are in your AR balance account, but that's sort of generally what we've seen. And we found this is a really easy way to just like get people comfortable with sending digital invoices. And a lot of times the feedback that hospitals using this have gotten from their clients is like, oh man, I just forgot to pay that. Like, was nothing about trying to, stiff their practice or anything like that. They just like would maybe get a paper invoice, be like, okay, cool, I'll get to that. And then just forget, like an honest mistake. So we really have found that like having this process digitally can be really great for some of those collections too. And it's really not usually like a contentious process. And this can be a really quick way if you're trying to get your practice accustomed to digital payments, just to run through this exercise of pulling a list of AR balances, uploading it to Scratchpay, and then customizing and sending those messages. It's really empowering if you spend about 30 minutes doing it, maybe a little customization. If you think you have an average AR of maybe $5,000, it can be up to 15 we've seen depending on the practice. It's a pretty high ROI from that exercise and can really be done by anyone in the practice. And we've especially found, like I mentioned earlier, this can be a great task if you have team members that maybe want an extra hour or two of work, but they're being quarantined because of like a COVID exposure. We actually have practices right now that have folks at home being able to facilitate both AR and some of these digital payments. So that's just another way to kind of reduce stress is if you can take a process, package it for a team member that might be working remote due to no fault of their own. This is a way to kind of give them ownership of a task and a process as well that can be really high reward. And I could talk about payments forever. I think that's kind of all I had for the 3 suggestions. I just had a quick slide here, just some feedback we've gotten about our support. Because we are dealing with payments, we do offer 24/7 support. So that's really important, we know, to keep your practices up and running. And if you have any follow-ups, you're interested in anything we've talked about tonight, again, my email is just angela@scratchpay.com. Feel free to reach out and would love to either get you set up or answer any questions. So I'll pause there and maybe hand it back to Danny.
Thanks for that, Angela. Before, as we want to be respectful to everybody's time, we have about another 5 minutes here. I wanted to ask either Yang or Greg a question in regards to kind of the risks affiliated with that compliance on the medication side. As I know, a lot of the time in my conversations, at least with veterinarians and practice managers, there seems to be this hyper focus on service compliance as opposed to the medication compliance, like prevention and things like that. Just to really kind of drive it home, like what are can you elaborate on some of the risks involved from the practice's end, that what would happen as that compliance is dropping?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest risks that a hospital or really a veterinarian is on the hook for is their license, right? So with controlled drugs, they have to, they have to have a DEA license to be able to prescribe controlled substances, and then the hospital is then required, or that DEA, that DVM is then required to log all of the controlled substances. Usually it's the staff that's doing it, and so it's just important for them to make sure that all of the controlled substances that they're logging and they're dispensing, prescribing, needs to be accounted for. Which is part of the state regulations, is part of the federal regulations, and so really important for them to do that. We've heard when we were at NVA that doctors are like, well, the DEA's never come into my practice. I haven't seen anybody in 20 years. But we're hearing more and more that the DEA is starting to come over and trickle into diversion agents are coming into animal health. Primarily because human healthcare really has tightened up with different types of electronic systems on how they control these substances. Where animal health is still it tends to lag a little bit behind human healthcare. Where the systems today that they have in place are a paper logbook and then their practice management software and a safe and all of those different types of things. And so, for them to be able to maintain the compliance, it's still a very kind of like quote unquote archaic process compared to like what is happening in human health today. So that's really I would say one of the biggest risks there. Is just making sure that the records, the logs, everything is just matching appropriately with their physical inventory, and that they have those documents ready when and if state regulators, the DEA does come into the practice, which again we're hearing happens more and more. A follow-up question might be, well, how often is the DEA coming into veterinary hospitals? Well, the DEA doesn't actually publish numbers, right? They don't publish how frequently they're actually going into hospitals, which hospitals are under investigation, and how many that they're investigating every year. We just know it's happening, and it's happening with more frequency.
And Greg, I would add, another risk really is your own people, right? So Forget about just the DEA compliance and losing your license. Having a system that's easy to use, so people are able to stay more on top of counts to make sure that expected on-hand quantities to actual is accurate, and just get a better sense that things are being tracked well at the sites. It also helps with actual just diversion, right? Prevents folks at the hospital from getting into situations that they probably shouldn't be getting into. So there's the risk of government risk, and then there's people risk. Just taking care of your own folks and helping with diversion. So, yep.
Great question,
I was
Dana.
going to add too, just thinking about what you talked about, Greg and Yang, with the time-saving component. Angela, what you talked about also with the time-saving component. That's something we talk about all the time, to the point that we have a whole package created for our clients, literally, that's just about efficiency in the practice. So I'm a numbers person a little bit, and I was thinking through, Greg, you mentioned 5 to 25 entries a day and 3 minutes on average spent. So you're talking by the end of a work week, someone spent almost a full day of time manually entering that. And then Angela, with the payments, over the phone, the 1 to 5 minute phone call, you're talking a couple days of time. I don't know how many payments, they're processing, but for these practices that are still doing curbside, it's, insane the amount of time that we're talking about saving here with some tools that really automate the process a lot more, which I think is not something that we think about as much in the vet industry, frankly, because just no one has time to think about it, unfortunately. So I just wanted to mention that as something that, we're not talking about a few minutes here. We're talking about literally like a whole shift of one of your team members working with these tools.
Exactly. And Yang, Greg, Angela, I wanted to thank you guys so much for your time here as we're coming to a close. For all of our attendees who took the time to join here, we really encourage you to reach out to your client service manager. We'd love to hear back in terms of feedback, even future topics, as we're going to be regrouping in January, as a primary focus is going to be data security at the clinic. Happy to welcome VetSnap along with Scratchpay, their first inaugural time sharing here on PUP. Hope to see more of them, right? And if you guys have any questions in terms of for Greg, Yang, or Angela, you feel free to connect with your VisiSites client service rep, as they also have their information posted in the recording, which everybody should get shortly. But with that, thanks so much, everybody. Have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you guys on episode 4.
Thank you.
Thanks, VisiSites.
Thank you so much
See you
for having
guys.
us.